Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Pranzata Podcast. This is your host, Andrea Pranzatelli. This is episode number 74 on my podcast series here on YouTube. Before we get started, if you are new to this YouTube channel, don't forget to hit subscribe, don't forget to hit like, and most importantly, don't forget to comment as I go along. One of the reasons and my goals from this podcast is to actually make this an interactive experience between me and the listeners. I'm a very introverted person. I've been lost in my own head most of my life. And one of the reasons I started doing this podcast is because I wanted to start branching out and connecting with people. So I want to share my thoughts with you, and I want to know what your thoughts are in return. Because I like to talk about complex issues and that type of thing, and I want to know what your opinions are, if you agree with me, disagree with me, that type of thing, and to get the conversation moving. Okay, so before we get into it, one more thing before we get into the questions. Today is a solo podcast. When I sometimes I interview people. I tried to interview somebody this week, and it was my first time attempting to do a Zoom podcast, and it was a failure. I couldn't, I figured out how to do the record button, but I couldn't figure out like the mechanics of how to do like the split screen. It was literally just like my face, and I couldn't get their face, and they were there for like 30 minutes trying to direct me through Zoom how to do it, and I couldn't figure it out. So that was a disaster. So I'm rescheduling with them. So unfortunately this week we don't have a guest, it's just me. But one of the exciting things about that is when I do solo podcasts, I take questions from the listeners. So if you want to be included in this, the next time I do a solo podcast, you can either submit your question in the comment section right here, which a lot of my listeners have, or if you look in the information section below, like the description of the podcast episode, there will actually be a directions how to either email me or contact me on Instagram if you want to submit like a private question there and you don't, an anonymous question of some kind. Last thing, I had a complaint last week from one of my personal friends, not from one of my listeners, but from one of my personal friends in my life, about my podcast. They said that they were like, girl, you need to turn down your beauty lights, because I was explaining in the last episode that I'm very insecure about like wrinkles and stuff. So I use a ring light, and one of my friends, and it was a male friend too, he was complaining like, if you think you look prettier with that, like you're wrong, like that you look like an alien, like you don't have the same skin tone as I see you in real life. He's like, that ring light makes you look really white, really washed out, really alien. He's like, your wrinkles are not that bad, like cut it out. And so I'm experimenting today. So if you're like, why does this bitch look completely different than she did last week? It's because I'm following the advice of my friend, who I trust their opinion, and I'm seeing how it works. I'll be honest, I could see the camera right now, and while I do agree that my skin tone looks more natural, I think and I don't even think my wrinkles look that bad. It's not even that. I actually just think the video looks worse. Like I feel like there's like weird lights and shadows, but I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about that. And if you're not sure, like if you haven't seen a previous video, then just like click, this is episode 74. So go to episode 73 and do like a back-to-back comparison and let me know like what your thoughts are on that. Like, cause I want to make sure, on one hand, I want to make sure that I do the things that make me happy on here, but I also want to make sure that, things like that I'm not seeing that are absolutely ridiculous, I also want those to be pointed out to me as well, because I want people to be able to receive the information on here. And what my friend told me was that, he said because he knew what I looked like in real life, and that's not what I looked like in real life, he said it was too distracting and he couldn't watch the podcast. So I don't want to do that. So you guys can let me know personally, like, see, okay, like I'm annoyed by this because my cat just like opened the curtain and he's looking out the window, and now there's this like weird light and shadow coming in the back, and the beauty light's kind of like is so powerful that you don't get any of that stuff, but whatever, we're just going to go with it. Okay. Questions and answers. Let's get right into it. My first question, these questions I got today, I feel like every week they're getting more and more challenging for me, which I like. It's also kind of nerve-wracking because I'm afraid that I'm going to say something stupid or offend somebody, but let's get right into it. Number one, forgive me if I mispronounce your Instagram handle, but K Madden, I think that's what it is, K Madden 462. He asked me, what is your definition of happiness? I ask that to a lot of people, and they're usually stumped. I'll repeat the question one more time for those who didn't catch that. K Madden 462 wants to know, what is your definition of happiness? I ask that to a lot of people, and they're usually stumped. Okay, so I actually got this question about 3 days ago, and so I had some time to like sit and think about it. And I can understand, after thinking about it and like, putting thought into it, I could totally understand why people are stumped by this, because I realized that the word happiness, in my opinion, is too broad of a term to give one definition. So the way I worked it out in my head was that I divided, and it's probably more than 3, but just for the sake of simplifying this conversation, I divided happiness into 3 types of happiness. So to me, happiness in itself can't be defined or lumped into one thing. The 3 branches of happiness to me would be 1, excited, and I think excited is probably the easiest form to attain. And, depending on the person, like some people have depressions and stuff and they don't experience that type of excitement. But to me, it's like, I would say excitability is more like hedonistic pleasures of life, and whether they're good or bad. Not all hedonism is bad hedonism. But you know what I mean? Like simple things, like if you get a like on Instagram and you get excited for that second, or if you have a cup of coffee that tastes really good and you get excited for that second. I don't know what would be another example of this. If you eat something that tastes good, stuff like that. I feel like excited are short little bursts of happiness that only last temporary, that only last for like a few minutes or so, sometimes maybe a few days, depending. Like if you had some kind of grand achievement of some sort, I would say excitability could last a few days, but usually even with those grander things like grand achievements, like if you passed a degree of some kind, you were studying for your law degree and you passed it, you might get this like huge burst of excitement that lasts like a few days or a few weeks, but even that eventually dies down. And I think that's what I mean by excitability. It's like, it's a very temporary form of excitement. And I think it's one of the easiest ones to attain on a daily basis, because you get them all day long. You get a like on Instagram, an email from a friend, things like that. You just get these like little bursts of excitement. So, okay, that's my first definition, is excitability. My second form of happiness that I would, in these 3 branches that I created, to me would be content. I would say content is being able to look at your day or your life, depending on, how old you are or where you're at in life. But let's just, simplify it with day. I would say content is being able to look at your day and say, I did everything I had to do today. It's kind of like a feeling of completion. Like you can sort of look around your room and say, okay, everything's in the right spot. You can look at your to-do list and say, okay, I did everything on my to-do list. I'm content. I'm okay with today, and I'm okay with how today went. I would say content is a big one. More difficult, again, like I'm kind of like categorizing these 1, 2, 3 in levels of achievement, like what's easier to achieve. I think, again, the first one is excitability. I think that's pretty easy to achieve. You can achieve it through a drink of alcohol, you know what I mean? Or, a good grade on an exam. Level 2, content, I think that's a little more deep. It's more looking at the big picture of things and the things you want to do with your life and everything like that. So contentment, again, how did your day go? Are you happy with, it's funny, I just used the word happy in that, but let's say content. Are you content with how everything in your day went? And can you go to bed and rest peacefully? That would be the second. And for me, the third type of happiness, which I believe can be the most difficult to attain depending on who you are. I know for me personally, it's the most difficult one to attain. It's kind of like my goal in life to figure out how to attain this one right now. But anyways, I'm leading you guys on here. The third one to me would be peace. And I would describe peace as being able to let go of fear and take in the love around you, even if that's not your norm. So like for me personally, how this would manifest is I always had a lot of like trust issues in my life, like because of childhood trauma I had experienced. And I've always been like a very guarded person, and it's weighed heavily on my life. Like it's really had a negative impact on me in my life in many ways. So to me personally, peace is when I can just let go of those fears and actually like trust the moment. You know what I mean? And I don't even think you have to have trust issues to be able to relate to this, because I think trusting the moment is just letting go of fear, period. You know what I mean? Because like, your personal issue or like thing that kind of holds you back may not be trusting relationships, but it could just be trusting that everything's going to be okay. Trusting whatever fear that you have, because you could be afraid of, financial stress. You know what I mean? You could be financially stressed and afraid that you're not going to be able to pay your bills on time or anything, whatever like that. It's not necessarily a trust and relationship thing, but it's still to a degree a trust thing, because it's like you're not trusting the universe that everything's going to be okay. So to me, peace is letting go of whatever fears are holding you back and really just enjoying and appreciating life for what it is, no matter how difficult it is. Because you can even, and I think this must be really difficult to achieve, but I believe you can even learn how to have peace even in times of suffering. So yeah, just to kind of like quick review your question in faster words, I think it's hard to define happiness because there is no such thing as one type of happiness. You can branch it out. And to me, those branches are 1, excitability, 2, contentment. I don't even know if that's a word, but you know what I mean. And 3, peace. I'm going to be honest right now. I don't really think I'm much of any of those right now. I know that's like a little harsh to say out loud, or like a little jarring to admit, on this podcast, but I do go through cyclical depressions throughout the year. I would say like 2 or 3 times a year I suffer from depression. And right now I'm kind of going through a cycle and I'm in the thick of it. And what I noticed personally is that when I go through this end of the depression cycle, it's usually because I relied too heavily on the first type of happiness that I told you about, which is hedonistic pleasures and easy to get excitable things that aren't really serving me in the long term. And I think for me personally, once I've like I've abused those types of things, I start to get to a point where they don't work for me anymore. Like those hedonistic things don't work for me anymore. And then I have to face like the other two, which is contentment and peace. And I think those are the I think it's a little bit easier for me to attain contentment, because I think you can set goals and you can think about long-term goals and you can try your best to achieve daily goals. So I think to a degree it's a little bit easier to attain those things, but to me peace is probably the most difficult thing to attain. And I would imagine I'm not alone there. It's probably just the human experience. Like, like anybody who's just like chronically at peace, like they're an enlightened being. Like, you know what I mean? I don't think they exist on this earth. Maybe they do. I don't know. But I think that's, to me, that's like the goal of life, is to try to find peace as much as possible. And I know that I'm not the only one. Like, I can't be the only one who like feels that way, that feels like that's the hardest one to attain. And that's the goal. You know what I mean? That's like one of the biggest goals of life. Anyways, that's my answer to what is happiness. It definitely not an easy one to answer. And I didn't just come with that on the fly. I had like 3 days to think about that. Okay. So that was that. Question number 2. Next question. Okay. This is by Purple Beanie Dude. He's my friend on Instagram. He was actually on this podcast as well. He's an incredible guitar player, like out of this world. I was so impressed. He wants to know, his question for everybody, for me, and for everybody else is it equality if we aren't willing to take on responsibility, or is that just special treatment? Let me repeat the question again, because when I first heard this question, I didn't understand it at all, because it was like pretty wordy. So I actually had to like reach out to him and ask him to elaborate. So I will elaborate for you guys as well. But for those of you who are smarter than me and can figure out the question without the elaboration, the question is it equality if we aren't willing to take on responsibility, or is that just special treatment? So, like I said, I reached out to him about this, and I didn't understand the question. Like, I sort of got the question, but I didn't really fully understand it. So I asked him to explain it to me a little more. And we actually had a long conversation, so I'm not going to reiterate everything we talked about. But in a nutshell, what he was basically saying is he feels like there's a lot of people who promote political ideas about equality, but they're only promoting them on their social media. And when it comes to actually taking action in real life, they don't actually take the action. Okay, I think my answer to this question could be an answer that rambles on for a very long time. And it could just branch off into so many different directions. And just for the sake of keeping this a segment on the podcast and not the entire podcast, because I could literally talk an hour about this. So I think probably the best way for me to approach this question would be to pick one specific issue that I noticed being a common theme to like what he was talking about. So again, to reiterate what his explanation was to me when I reached out to him, he was saying that he notices there are a lot of people who fight for certain political issues, but he doesn't believe that they're actually genuinely believing that fight, or they don't actually genuinely need to fight that fight. They're just doing it for special attention of some kind. So I guess personally what I will talk about is if I were to pick one specific like branch of where this happens, I'm going to go with sexual identity politics and the LGBTQ community. I'm going to pick this issue because I personally have a lot of experience with this in my own life. I personally have had a lot of questions about myself and where I lie on the sexual spectrum, for one thing. And second of all, in particular, because I had lived with somebody, and I'm not going to name names or call people out, but I had personally at one point in my life lived with somebody who was somebody who was promoting gender identity, equality topics on her Instagram. And in my opinion, from what I noticed about her actions in real life, they didn't match the things she was promoting online. And I think she was a fraud. So I'm going to use this specific topic as an example because I can relate to it and see it myself. So when it comes to fighting for equality for your sexual identity, there is a valid fucking reason for this. And there are genuine people who do need to fight that fight. And there are still people in the United States who still have to fight for rights to gay marriage. You know what I mean? And, I'm somebody who I'm very conflicted on a lot of different things and on a lot of different opinions about religion and everything like that. But one thing I personally see as a flaw in religion and what holds me back from joining religions. And it's not, by the way, it's not all religions. There's actually some religions that are pro-gay marriage from what I understand. But, the most common religions that we see, like Christianity and Catholicism, I don't agree with the idea that gay marriage is a sin. In a nutshell, because this isn't really what the topic of the question is, but just to reiterate from what I've read about why Catholics, are anti-gay marriage, from what I understand, they believe that marriage should be something that is representative of love and family, and it shouldn't be something that is about sexual. They call them desires of the flesh. And I think, by the way, I'm not sure about this, but I think desires of the flesh could be more than just sexuality. It could just be like, desires, of any kind, of wanting to drink, wanting to waste your life. Like, from what I understand, that's what desires of the flesh mean. But sexuality is a branch of desires of the flesh. And I think that the Catholic perspective is that gay marriage, you're not celebrating family because you can't have a baby. You're just celebrating sexual expression. I think that's bullshit because I think that I've seen, I've seen people, gay marriages. I've know people in gay marriages that have like a beautiful, like they love each other. Like I can see by the way that they interact with each other that they're not just like fucking all the time in front of my face. They love each other. And I know one particular couple that adopted a child, and it's just like, to me, it's like I would never want to create a law to take that beautiful family away. So let's just get that clear. I do support equal rights, for your sexual identity. And I do think it is important to fight that fight. And some people have a really legitimate reason to fight that fight. However, I have known people, and again, this is somebody from my personal life. I don't want to call out their name, but I have known people who claimed that they needed to fight for sexual rights, for sexual identity rights, when they weren't even on the spectrum. Like they weren't even on, they were like, I'm trying not to like call this person out. That's why I'm having a hard time explaining this, but I'm not going to say their name just to be more blunt about it. I knew a person who would claim to be gay, and she was a female, by the way. So I guess I should say, lesbian. I knew a woman who would claim to be a lesbian, and she would always talk about, equal rights for her sexuality, that she's misunderstood. She's tired of being labeled as this. Like she was complaining a lot on her social media about how she was treated unfairly for being a lesbian. But I knew her personally, and maybe I don't know what lesbian means, but all I know is that I would see her try to like date women, and she would turn them down every single time. She would have these women over that she would meet on these dating apps, and she would send them home. But then she was completely obsessed with this one guy that she had dated, like in the neighborhood, and wouldn't stop talking about him, wouldn't stop thinking about him. I mean, to be blunt, she literally had a dildo molded out of his cock. Like, you know what I mean? And I'm sorry if that was a bit much for everybody, but to me, like, how could this person claim to be suffering from not having equal rights when she's clearly straight? Like, you know what I mean? So, and I'm trying not to come across as like harsh or offensive to anybody out there, because again, I want you to understand that I do support gay rights. Like, I'm very anti the idea that gay marriage is not appropriate. Like, I think that's terrible. But I do genuinely see in my own life people joining this bandwagon of promoting these political ideas just because they want some piece of the pie, a personal attention from it in some kind of way. And I also said before that I can personally relate to this, not only because I've seen it in my own life, but because I don't really share this a lot with people because it's like kind of personal to me. But just to clarify the conversation, I actually am on the sexual spectrum somewhere. I've had a lot of sexual confusion in my life. Because just to be completely blunt, a lot of my life I have been sexually attracted to women, but romantically attracted to men. So I'm actually somebody who has been sexually confused my whole life. And I can tell you personally, I've never felt the need to use that to gain some type of personal attention in my life. You know what I mean? Like I've never felt I've never felt like people owed me something because of that, or like, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, but I just think that I suppose if I was in a situation where I personally needed to fight for, if I was in love with a woman and I wanted to marry a woman and I needed to fight that, I would probably be promoting a lot more of these ideas. But what I'm saying is that wasn't the case for this female. She wasn't in a situation where she needed to fight for gay marriage. She wasn't even gay. She was like one of the most straight. She didn't like women. So like, that's what I'm trying to say. It's like you personally you're kind of ruining it for the people who actually do need to fight this fight, because what happens is you're making it look like a lie. You know what I mean? Like, I think people who personally, and again, don't get me wrong, it's okay to support other people, I believe that they in this community they call them allies, right? You can be an ally to the people that you do know who need to fight this fight. That's incredible. But you can't claim to be something you're not just to get attention. Like, to me, it's gross and it's crazy. And it's like, if anything, I had more rights to fight that fight because I actually had personal experiences with sexual confusion. You know what I mean? A lot of my life. So I don't know where I stand on that issue. And I feel like I'm going to get in trouble somewhere for saying something in that. And like, I know I probably said something stupid, but to kind of in a nutshell, bring that all together, my answer is like a little bit of both. Do these people genuinely want equality, or is it just special treatment? I think it depends on the person and it depends on the situation. There are people who 100% need to fight those types of fights, and there are fucking frauds. There are people who fight that fight just to look hip or look cool or to get some type of personal attention in it. And I'm sorry. I know I did something wrong. I don't know what I did, but I know I'm going to get backlash for that. All right. Next question. That was intense. The next question is also intense, so I'm kind of like want to switch the order to something more lighthearted just so we can switch up the pacing a little bit. But let's just go right into the other one because this kind of goes with it. Al Jess or Al Hess, depending on how you pronounce that. Because I know he's Hispanic, so I don't know if it's the J is pronounced with the H or if it's just Al Jess. But whatever. Al Jess 18. What are your thoughts as an artist on cancel culture? Okay. What are my thoughts as an artist on cancel culture? I'm going to speak to this from the perspective of a comedian. I've noticed a trend with comedians that a lot of comedians come across as on the far right because they're pro freedom. And I kind of want to explain that to people. Like, why are all these comedians like seem like they're like Trumpers? They're not. They're actually not. Comedians are pro freedom because their entire career depends on saying crazy shit. You know what I mean? So from what I experienced, comedians are very passionate about the topic of cancel culture. And are very passionate about freedom of speech because, like I said, their entire career depends on being able to say crazy shit and being able to play with the boundaries of saying crazy shit. And that's true. Like, you know, people like Dave Chappelle and, you know, those type of people who say controversial things and get in trouble, their job is literally to like figure out where the line is. And most comedians will admit that there is such thing as crossing the line too far. And that is a possibility. But the thing is with the art of comedy is that you don't really know where that line is unless you try it. And then the only way to try it is by doing it in public. Like, you can't try comedy to yourself in your bedroom. You can't even just ask one person because one person's opinion isn't going to represent most of the public. So like literally the only way to try out comedic ideas is to use a live audience. So the idea of cancel culture and saying the wrong thing is really terrifying for comedians because it's like our art is literally dead if we don't have the right to say what we want. You know what I mean? Because like saying what we want is the only way to grow this art. So in a nutshell, my opinion on cancel culture is that I agree with that sentiment of the comedians because I've experienced that myself. I mean, literally just like a couple seconds ago in this podcast, I was like terrified that I said the wrong thing, even though everything I said was my genuine opinion. I was like scared that because I don't like, I'm not hip. I don't keep up with everything. I don't know like what, like, I feel like I might have said something wrong. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like a terrifying feeling. I guess more thoughts on this is that I personally had already talked about this on my podcast about Joe Rogan. When it came to like a lot of the cancel culture things and the people who, you know, society was trying to cancel, for the most part, I just kind of buried my head in the sand about those types of things and didn't really speak my opinion on those things. It wasn't until the public started attacking people that I like that I was like, wait a second, I'm fucking pissed now because if it's somebody I don't care about, it's not my business, right? Like, I'm not involved. I don't, and that's selfish, but that's the truth is that these people who were getting canceled were people that I didn't know, didn't give a shit about. But when the whole controversy came out with Joe Rogan, all of a sudden I like pepped up and was like, wait a second, what the fuck? And because I felt like, well, now cancel culture is fucking with the people that I love, and that's not cool. So kind of, I did a whole podcast episode about that. Maybe I'll actually include that in a link below to that episode if you want to go back to it, because I was very descriptive and vocal about what my thoughts and feelings were. And I don't think I could like reiterate all those feelings right now because it's kind of behind me and I'm not as passionate about it. But to kind of reiterate what happened in a nutshell, I felt like it was I personally felt like that whole thing was unfair because, in case people don't know the controversy, Joe Rogan had been caught in a clip using the N-word, and then that clip circled the media, and I feel like that was a very false representation of him because the clip that they used was from a long time ago. I don't know when it was, or I don't know what year it was, but all I know is that it was old. It was definitely more than 5 years old. You know what I mean? Because I had personally been watching. Well, before I get to this part, let me explain this. A lot of people saw this clip of him using the N-word, and he's a white man, for those of you who don't know. A lot of people saw this clip of him using the N-word and just assumed that was him. Like, they just assumed that was his personality, that he was just dropping N-word left and right. Oh my God. Left and right on his podcast. And that was him. And that wasn't the truth, in my opinion, because I had personally been a huge fan and I had been watching him for the past like 4 or 5 years. And I had never once seen any type of behavior like that. I've never seen him use the N-word. I've never even seen him use it in a positive context where he was just like describing a song, like, you know what I mean, with the N-word in it. I never seen him use that word. But again, these clips circled the internet, and there were rumors going around by people who didn't even watch his show, by the way. That was the ironic thing. People were like, he's been using the N-word for 10 years. And it's like, no, he hasn't. I've been watching his show for the past 4 years, and I've never seen him use it once. So, in my opinion, I think cancel culture has a place for certain people who are extreme. Like, okay, Bill Cosby. Like, cancel that motherfucker. Like, he's like drugged and raped people. I don't want to listen to his comedy anymore. It makes me sick. It's too dark to watch. I can't watch it anymore. You know what I mean? It's like, it's gross. You know what I mean? But in an instance like Joe Rogan, where he used the N-word a long time ago, and it wasn't even, and again, this doesn't make it right. I'm not saying this makes it right. But if you actually look at the context in which he said it, he wasn't like bashing, he wasn't using it in a negative context. I think he was using it to describe the word and like the power that word has. You know what I mean? He was like kind of using it in that type of context. And again, not that makes it okay, but it's just understand that back then, I don't think people understood that wasn't okay. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the Black Lives Matter, stuff started coming out recently. And a lot of the movement with the Black Lives Matter stuff was confronting people to admit that they were engaging in behaviors that were racist and they didn't know it. Like that was one of the biggest things of the movement was, obviously there was much bigger reasons, like, the police, the way blacks were treated in the police force and everything like that. Or the way the police force treated them. That's like a whole different story. But after that incident, with the George Floyd, there was a lot of then further, trying to re-educate white people that, hey, you've been engaging in racist behaviors and you don't even know it. And we just want you to admit that. Like, we don't want you to say you're a bad person. We just want you to honestly look at yourself, look at your behaviors, and admit where you were wrong. And I'll be honest, I know a lot of white people that I've heard use the N-word in my life, and like for similar reasons that Joe Rogan had used it back then in that clip. And they didn't realize, like they probably didn't realize the power that they had. You know what I mean? Like that how they didn't realize at the time how offensive that was. And a lot of those people owned up and admitted like, wow, I was wrong. So I don't understand like why people would take that one clip out of context and label him like that and not allow him forgiveness. Again, I think cancel culture has its place. There are extremes. Had there been a man who is repeatedly using the N-word and never apologizing for it, never realizing he was wrong, continuing to use it now after all this, yes, cancel that motherfucker. But cancel culture is dangerous because it's like a smear campaign. It's like a political smear campaign. People catch somebody doing something and they go, gotcha, let's use this one incident about them and just describe it to them as a whole and, try to take them down from it. I don't agree with that. I think people need to have a little more forgiveness for people and have a little more forgiveness for the people as a whole. For example, one girl that I knew personally that was promoting a lot of the Black Lives Matter stuff on her Instagram, she was a white woman. I knew her personally. The irony of this is that, she was every day with it, like on her Instagram stories. And it's funny, this actually ties in with the other question about, is it equality or is it just special treatment? I should have used that as the example. This is like kind of like a crazy example. But this woman, I'm not going to say her name, but every single day on her Instagram, she was like, you're a piece of shit if you don't fight for Black Lives Matter. You better do this. You better say this. You better. It was like kind of like bullying people to do this, do that. White woman, same woman, I worked with her, got fired for using the N-word like 5 years prior. So that's just like the irony of it is like, should we not forgive her? Like, should we just say, oh my God, she used the N-word 5 years ago and she got fired for it at her job. So now she's not allowed to change her mind and she's, you know what I mean? She's forever a piece of shit. Now she wants to support the cause. She feels bad. You know what I mean? It's just like, I don't know. It's like, I just think there needs to be deeper thought put into these types of things when they happen. And people need to be a little more gray and not so black and white about these issues. To me, the Joe Rogan issue was a much grayer issue than people made it out to be. And that's why I think the cancel culture could be dangerous for those reasons because, some really genuine good people who are helping a lot of people could be taken down from one mistake. And I don't think that's fair. Just kind of like put yourself in those shoes. Imagine if you were a public figure. Imagine if you were a public figure and you were constantly on camera all the time, like whether you're a podcaster or you're being interviewed constantly by people. Are you on your best behavior all the time? You know what I mean? And you could say, oh, but you're a public figure. You should know better that even they fuck up. Like, you know what I mean? Like they can't be perfect all the time. Like I was just reading this the other day, by the way. Apparently Obama was like a heavy smoker, like a heavy cigarette smoker during the White House. And I guess what I'm trying to say by this is like, not everybody could put up this like perfect image all the time. Eventually everybody's going to crack. Eventually everybody's going to do something dumb, say something dumb. Like their darkness is going to come out sometimes, you know what I mean? And that doesn't define them as a human being. We all have darkness within us. So again, I think it's a matter of like recognizing that person's reaction to their dark behaviors. Are they going to deny it and say like, nope, this is me and fuck you, you're all wrong that you got offended? Or are they going to own up and apologize? I think that's really the defining, I really think that's the defining feature of a human. Not did they fuck up, but are they willing to change? You know what I mean? Anyways, that's why I said like, I don't know if I wanted to get in that one right after the other one, but I am passionate about that. Cause like I said, as a comedian, it is something I think about. And especially because I love comedy. So a lot of the comedians I follow are being attacked, you know? Okay, let's go to a nicer one. The next one is called, it wasn't really a question. It was just called Chasing Passions. Somebody just wrote Chasing Passions. Talk about the subject of chasing passions. Because I did say to people, and give me topics or questions. So I guess you just gave me a topic. So I guess I'm going to have to pick my own thing here about chasing passions. I will say that I think, in my opinion, chasing your passion is one of the best things you could do to free yourself in our modern society. Which isn't always true, actually. Like now, I'm like kind of doubting my own answer now that I said that, because I do find this other problem where sometimes people chase their passions and then become something else because of it. Like, for example, like let's say somebody has genuine desire to be a podcaster. Let's just use me for example. Let's say I have a genuine desire to get my ideas out there and be a podcaster. But let's say now I'm dealing with this thing called the algorithm, and I have to figure out what the algorithm wants in order for me to be successful. And now my original intentions were to talk about philosophy, but I'm noticing that I get more hits and clicks when I talk about sex. You know what I mean? Which is actually, by the way, true. I've asked all kinds of questions on my podcast. I talked to a software engineer, and it's so funny. Like, I looked at these two clips back to back because they were really close to each other. One clip said, "What's your favorite sex position?" And then the next clip said, "What is a software engineer?" The one that's called "What is a software engineer" got like 11 views. The one that "What is your favorite sex position" got like 3,000 views. So it's actually a true thing. But I guess what I'm trying to get out here is, like, I originally started when I was originally answering that question with the statement, like, I think following your passion is the best way to freedom. But that's actually not true, because on the way to freedom through your passion, you can accidentally become a slave to the algorithm. So keep that in mind, that that's a possibility. But let's assume that you don't become a slave to the algorithm, that you genuinely just follow your heart and you follow your passion, right? You ignore the algorithm. You don't care about the views. You don't care about what people want. You just genuinely try to search for what's in your heart and try to channel that in and put that out there. Let's say you have the willpower to do that. I believe that that is one of the most freeing things you can do on this earth while you're alive. And by the way, it's not for everybody. Like, it is for everybody. Okay, what I mean by that is it is for everybody in the sense that your passion doesn't have to be as big as somebody else's. Like, for one person, your passion could be being a public figure who does speeches live around the world. You know what I mean? Who does inspirational, like Tony Robbins. Like, let's just use Tony Robbins. His passion could be inspiring people and traveling the world. It could be this like grand thing where he reaches and connects with millions of people. Your passion could be working in a restaurant and making the best fucking pizza in the kitchen. You know what I mean? Like, and nobody knows your name. Like you just, but for whatever reason, like, everybody comes to that restaurant and they're like, yo, whoever the cook is, I don't know his name, I don't know what he looks like, but he makes the best fucking pizza. And like, you have a word in that town. Like, those are two different extremes of passion, but they're both equally as valuable in my opinion. So I really think, passion is important, and big passion isn't for everybody. You don't have to follow this humongous dream to find that passion. But I think whatever you're doing, if you can figure out how to find what you love in this life, that is the most freeing thing you could possibly do. For me personally, actually, and to backtrack a little bit, I also think there's also a connection there between doing what makes you happy, but also finding a way to allow that to be a gift for the public. Because I think at the end of the day, if you do what makes you happy, but you're just kind of hoarding it to yourself, there's no joy in that. I don't think there's going to be any long-term joy in something like that. But using the pizza thing, for example, if making pizza is what makes you happy and you find a way to connect that with the public and it's seen as a gift that you give to the world, that's when you're locked in my opinion. So my advice for chasing your dreams is, 1, figure out what makes you feel alive, 1, and 2, figure out if there's a way to make that a gift or a service to the public. That would be my honest opinion and advice about chasing passions. And again, you didn't really ask a question, so I kind of had liberty to go wherever I wanted with that, but that's where I'm going to go with that, is just do it. Like find a way to do it in your life and take the time to figure out how it could be done and what are your passions. You know what I mean? First, discover what your passions are. I also don't believe that there's like one passion for everybody. That's another thing too. Like, I think, I'm passionate about so many things. I'm passionate about music. I'm passionate about comedy. I'm passionate about philosophy. I'm passionate about foreign languages. Like, there's a lot of things you could do and a lot of different avenues you could take with your passion. Okay, last question. I only had 5 questions today. The last one is from Asiatic. He's a loyal listener and a friend. His question is, what's one moment where you planned on going somewhere and you didn't and you regret it? So let me repeat the question. What's one moment where you planned on going somewhere and you didn't and then later regretted it? So I actually do have something for this. It's funny. It's the second time I'm bringing Joe Rogan up on the podcast, but this is actually true. There's a steakhouse in New Jersey called, it's in New Brunswick. I actually don't remember, Steakhouse 82 or something. I wish I could like remember the name exactly, because then I could shout them out for people who live in New Brunswick. But it's near Stress Factory. That's all I know. There's like a comedy club in New Brunswick called Stress Factory, and right across the comedy club there's a steakhouse, and I think it's called Steakhouse 82. Anyways, I remember years ago I took one of my ex-boyfriends there on a date for his birthday, and it was one of the best fucking steaks I ever had in my entire life. And I was like, I want to go back there one day. You know what I mean? And one day I remember having this like inclination to go, like this, it was like winter, it was like cold. I remember being like in my own head, I really want to go to the steakhouse. I've been talking about going there. And I was by myself that day. I think I was single at the time and was just kind of like lonely, and I wanted to go out and do something. But then I was like, it's too cold out. I'm just going to stay in bed and snuggle in the sheets. Well, guess what, motherfuckers? The next day I saw on Instagram on Joe Rogan's, it was either a story or it was an actual post. I can't remember. But it was, hey, was just in New Brunswick, New Jersey at the Stress Factory Comedy Club seeing, I don't remember which comedian it was exactly, but Giannis Papas or something like that. I don't remember which comedian. That is not important. But he was seeing one of his friends do comedy at the Stress Factory. And then he decided afterwards to go to Steakhouse 82. And this was all happening on the same night that I wanted to go. So I don't know if that was like a divine like intuition to go there when he was. Because like I do believe in stuff like that if you want something and you want something to happen, like you can sort of like manifest it in real life. And I remembered like a thought of mine was always like, man, like I would love to meet him and have a conversation with him in real life. That would be so fucking cool. Or I would love my podcast to get big enough that I could, you know, be on his podcast one day. Like that would be a dream of mine. So the fact that I was like that close to running into him, like really, that kind of freaked me out. And I do fucking regret not going to Steakhouse 82 that night. It was just like such a weird, like I was so pissed at myself. I was like, why did I have to be so fucking lazy and not go out because it was cold? Because I literally could have met my idol. I mean, maybe then again, I could have gone there, and then if I tried to approach him, he could have been like, leave me alone, I'm eating. Like, you know what I mean? Because he's a celebrity. So it doesn't necessarily mean like I would have actually got to meet him and talk to him. But I don't know. You never know. Like maybe, I don't know what he's like to like strangers. Like maybe I could have been sitting at the bar next to him, and maybe if I like played it cool and just like pretended not to be a huge fan, I could have just been like, hey, how are you doing? And acted dumb. Like I could have had a cool conversation with him. You know what I mean? So yeah, I highly regret like not going to Steakhouse 82 that night, because that I would have been just, even if I didn't get to talk to him, I think I would have been like giddy just to like see my idol. You know what I mean? I would have been like really excited about it. But anyways, so that's it, guys. I only have 5 questions today. I kept it on the shorter side today. I have a really busy week. I have like 2 gigs coming this week. I have like a reunion coming up, like from old coworkers I worked with and that kind of thing. So there's a lot going on right now. I couldn't really spend a full hour or more with you guys today, but I am attempting the Zoom podcast again this Friday. So hopefully I'll have another actual, conversation with 2 people coming up soon. But again, this is the Pranzata Podcast, episode 74. If you liked it, don't forget to hit subscribe. Don't forget to hit like. Don't forget to comment on anything I talked about. I feel like I might get some, kind of rough comments about some of the things I talked about today, but regardless, I want to hear it anyways, because I want feedback. I want to know if I crossed the line or did something, you know what I mean? Kind of like going back what I was saying with the comedy thing. The only way to know if I crossed the line is by like trying it. So I want like an honest review from you guys if like I, said anything that was a little, you know what I'm trying to say. I don't have the best, by the way, I just want to throw out, I don't have the best vocabulary. I feel like my ideas are bigger than the vocabulary that I have to like get them across. So I have been doing a lot of reading to try to like increase my vocabulary so I could articulate myself more clearly. But bear with me and have some patience with me. And like, if I ever say maybe you guys can like let me know what an appropriate word to fill the sentence would have been. Anyways, that's it. Pranzata Podcast, episode 74. Have a good day, guys. Bye.